when you, yep. And then when they call you, you see it.
I like the fact that it's on access with 4th Street. That's very nice.
That's right, and it's the representing the source of the river.
That means that I am talking.
Will the bridge be going in the same orientation as the bridge was?
People got stranded, not when we went down later. Because there were people that were there. Crazy, and then it just dissipated slowly.
All depends on the rain side. Right now, we're gonna get some rain here and most of it is south of us. So it stays down there.
Test, yeah.
Steve, are you ready? I guess we'll call the meeting to order. Ready here? We'll start with the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion? Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Approve, disapprove, same sign. Finance, approval of the disbursements. Do I have a motion?
Move that you approved.
Second? Second. Oh, and not, any discussion?
Maybe,
Oh, I'm not, yeah.
Steve, could you maybe just briefly kind of talk to us about the budget and how you see it ending? Given the other things on the agenda, it appears that we'll have expenses over revenue, so if you could just maybe inform us how you amend the budget and what that looks like and when we will see that in July or August.
Yep, absolutely. That is true. Budget amendments, I mean, we keep it in step, and so that's why you see that the budgeted allocated revenue always equals, even if sometimes it seems like the line items are disjointed, they equal the expenses. And so we have had a harsh winter. We've had lots of projects, even going up into this point, and so the likelihood of being real close to balance was in jeopardy even a month ago. I remember bringing that up. You'll have a item before you here, an agenda item here in just a few that we can talk more about, but what it would do is utilize what was likely to be the balance, the fund balance envisioned at the end of this fiscal year, this current fiscal year, was going to be somewhere around just shy of $28,000, or I should say is going to be. And you have an agenda item here tonight about some rent forgiveness for some flood-affected folks, tenants, and that would eliminate that fund balance. I just want to be clear about that, and we can talk more about it. But all that leads to the notion that we are going to, with that action, have our expenses far exceed our revenue. If there's any sunlight on that, I think that the projections looking into next year, when we are back to some level of normalcy, not abating rent because of flood evacuations, having additional leasees, tenants throughout, looks solid. In fact, it is nearly double what that fund balance projection is this fiscal year for 2020. And so a slower go of reaching some of those initial projections that I had forwarded to you at budget time. But, you know, that's where we're currently at this fiscal year with a month remaining.
I just have a further question. The amount of money that we're spending due to flooding or the damages that are occurring due to flooding, those that won't be covered by insurance, I'm sure those are being submitted to the finance department. Has the administration and the council talked about reimbursing funds like ours for flooding, or has there been any discussion
So a couple,
in that regard?
A couple specifics on that. There are a couple items that are going right, not even going through our budget, but going right to the flood account. And so, yes, to your directly to your question, they don't necessarily flow through our account. And even a lot of my time lately has been devoted, in fact, much of it, and it's at least being recorded through the flood account. I have to make note of that on the timesheet. And so those sorts of things, and whether it is insurance specifically, you know, city insurance, or you know, flood account, which ends up being, you know, a budgetary thing, or FEMA, all that remains unknown at this point, for me at least. But I would just say that I don't know of any really that's flowing through our budget at this point. Much of that is I'm sending it elsewhere and it's being accepted accordingly. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Steve?
Is there state disaster relief for us as well?
So I don't know the specifics of some of our projects and how it relates to that funding source. And I think some of that initially has been more for private enterprise. So I haven't heard an update on the city portion of that. But I know it's being.
Who's the point person within the city for that?
I assume finance. I assume Brandon, right?
Brandon?
Mhm. I assume so, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Are you on mic?
Yeah, sorry.
Anybody else? So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the disbursements, is there shown? Aye? Say nay. Nay, same sign. Motion carries. So now we're on to the leases. Rita Rawson's at the Union Station. Steve?
Right, so this is, Rita has an office, and then you'll remember a couple months back, about halfway through her initial year lease, that she picked up another office adjacent. And so this is a renewal for 2 more years, but we are combining those two sensibly into one. And so this is just a normal, her lease is up in July, and we're now combining those two into one, and it's a 2-year agreement with her. And we had it before you last month, right?
Second?
Who did the second? D, okay.
Any discussion? No question.
Yes, that is a typo.
Yeah, I thought this had been around.
Yes.
Before I went, it actually only missed the 1 meeting.
Right.
So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against, same sign. And Steve, I'm withholding for conflict of interest.
Okay.
Brings up projects. Steve. Lindsay. Excuse me. Lindsay Park Boat Club, and we have 2 members here. We actually have the Commodore and the Vice Commodore. Christy Ellenberger and Colonel Dan Darling are here from the Yacht Club.
Right, and so I'm just going to kind of introduce that, and then Dan Darland is going to, I believe, speak to you a little bit more. But a couple weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, Chairman Walton and myself met with a small group, including these two individuals, on site for a tour of the flood effects of one of our tenants. It was very illuminating to see what had transpired in that particular, in the upper pool in that area. I think most of you know where the Lindsay Park Boat Club is, off Mound Street and East River Drive, and it sort of shares a boundary, if you will, with the Channel Cat walkway on the far upstream area. And so we were able to kind of look at the damage, which was less than what I had thought as it relates to the docking system at the Channel Cat. Lots of debris. I think we're going to see a redo of that again here in the next few days. But the point of the meeting was we each got a nice thorough briefing about the silting in, the ongoing challenges with dredging in that area. I won't get into the details to be redundant, but there has been, I think, 4 to 5 feet of, since that flood, and actually since the upstream bridge construction, they will tell you a little bit about that, has been silted in to a point where many of their boats are having trouble, if not are not allowed access at all. It's becoming quite an issue. And so 2 points that I want to make. One is that they do periodic dredging. There is an agreement. The Corps of Engineers actually is responsible for the maintenance of periodic maintenance dredging of this area, but when contacted, respond essentially that there's no funding, that they have no funding to do so. And so they have taken out, a loan before, and we've approved that, and that is forthcoming again, but it's a sizable amount of money, and so they have reached out to congressional delegation and some other avenues I'll let Dan talk about, but I think wanted to brief us and then also the rest of the commission about their activities to date. Okay, so Dan?
Steve, for point of clarification, there's no action today.
That is true, there is no action. That was when I thought that there might be, and what that action might end up being next meeting relates to their taking a loan and we not being party to it, but since we're a landlord to them, it's a very interesting, actually it's nice to see Ralph Henniger here because he knows about this agreement. It dates back to 1961, and it's this whole sort of harbor city, Lindsay Park Boat Club agreement. And so I'm going to let Dan provide some remarks here.
Leave that binder.
What's that?
Leave the binder back.
Okay.
Thanks. Good evening, I'm Dan Darland, and yeah, it's a bit of an interesting relationship because although we are a tenant, the club, it sits on and we rent city property. The harbor itself, the marina itself, is city property that we don't lease from you. We just manage it on your behalf. So that's sometimes it gets a little harder for us to do some of the things that we need to do without your involvement, and that's part of what started this conversation. So we do have a big issue with silting in, so the fines coming into the harbor. And I want to back up, and I did this for the congressional representatives, just make sure we understand the difference between the marina and the harbor. So the harbor is just quiet, safe water, right? So the Corps created this harbor, and the last line, and Steve referenced, when the document was completed, and I'll read it to you, it says, so the city's going to take it over, and at the very end says, with federal government performing periodic maintenance dredging. So in the completion document, the federal government says it's not reasonable for you guys to maintain the harbor. You can't do it. The city doesn't have a dredge. We'll do it. But now when asked, there's like, well, yeah, we know, and they'll admit they're supposed to do it. They hardly can't not admit that they're supposed to do it. They'll just say they don't have the funding. And that's again where we find ourselves. So then the marina is the services, the piers, place to tie up boats, the fuel, and all that, the store. So that creates the marina, and we manage the marina on your behalf. And the fees from the slips, the rental of the slips, is what we should be using to maintain the slips, run the store, all those things. We are having to take the fees for renting the slips and service loans for maintaining the harbor, for doing the dredging. Because the dredging, you're talking $500,000. We're starting some spot dredging now just because we have to get boats in. And we're looking at, $160,000, $200,000 just come in and do some spot dredging and clean up a few things. So what we found, the Corps did a survey of the harbor 2 years ago, and that's in the document in the binder. It's a very lovely binder, where we had 5-6 feet. We're allowed to have 5 feet below mean level pool. And right now, we did a survey. We paid to have a survey done a couple weeks ago, and we are sitting in some areas with about 2 foot of water. That survey and this survey was done at about the same river gauge level. Well, 2 foot of available water at 2 weeks ago was 17 something. So no, it's not even down a level pool. So at that level, we have boats that can't get into their slips. We have some slips we can't rent. So there's another $2,000, $2,500, depending on the size of the slip per year of revenue loss because we can't get a boat into it. So we started to ask for help in dredging, and we've spoken with Joe from Senator Ernst's office and John from Senator Grassie's office. Tomorrow we speak with Brian from Representative Lobsak's office to see what they can do to compel the Corps to come and do what they're obligated to do. And they got the same answer back, even though they went through their legislative assistants in D.C. to the Corps and then back. And basically they said they don't have the money right now because of the flooding, but maybe at the end of the year, if there's some, use it or lose it money, how the federal government works, they could come and maybe help in the fall. But that doesn't help now. One of the issues we've ran into, or I guess an interesting piece of information we ran into, in the same 2-year time period from the survey and the binder to the survey we just did, as we know, is the bridge construction, which we're all very happy to have a new bridge as much as it causes us pain right now. If you're not aware, the bridge contractors are required to put up silt curtains. So you see that on any land construction site, they'll put up a little black fence along the curbing, right, to keep the dirt and debris from coming into the street. They did the same thing in the river. Close down the side channels. You're only supposed to use the center channel. Speaking with the company who they subcontracted to put up the silt curtains, they report to us, so I guess it's a little bit of hearsay, that the bridge contractor never did use the entire amount of yards of material required to put up silt curtains, and that those silt curtains lasted for about 2 weeks and were gone, and they never replaced them. So if you look at the map and the curvature of the river, it is literally from the center channel of the I-74 bridge, it's a straight line to the mouth of our harbor. And so we're just eating those fines. And they come in, they hit this eddy that, even though you can't read numbers, you can see this hook right here. You can see this hook right here. That's the eddy that forms at the opening, which we think the Corps needs to do some study and redesign of that. And it just pulls the fines right into, so with the 4 floods last year, even though it didn't come over the outer wall, because of that eddy, it just hooks and pulls the fines right into our marina and into the harbor area. So we have found little help right now anyhow through our senators' offices. They're getting the same pushback from the Corps that we get. We think there's maybe some action that could be taken with the DOT, and they're still looking into that. And I believe the city was going to look into that to some degree from their angle, maybe hit it from both sides, as to see why the contractor didn't do it. And maybe they decided they would rather roll the dice and pay a claim if someone comes up with a claim rather than the expenditure of putting curtains up every 2 weeks. They may have decided, heck, it's cheaper to just pay a claim if somebody comes in than the sill curtains every 2 weeks. But it's impacted us to where we're having trouble renting, and people are even talking about leaving. And if they leave us, it means they're going up to, to Bettendorf or something. And we need to keep our members here and keep our revenue coming in. So quickly, that's where we're at. And I'm glad I have this opportunity to spell this out to you a little bit. Does anyone have any questions of me? Clarification of what I rambled about?
I'm grateful to hear your report. What, as a commission, what do you recommend that we do on your behalf?
Well, a couple of things. Looking at the angle of approaching through the DOT or directly the contractor who's doing the bridge construction, because we now have quantifiable evidence of how much silt has been brought in during the 2 years that they've been doing the construction. So I think that would be very helpful. I think a sit down face to face with the Corps to talk about our overall needs, to not only look at the dredging that they are supposed to be doing, but even at the design of the mouth of the harbor that creates this eddy. It's not even the original design that's also in the book, that would have prevented the material from being drawn into the harbor. I know the numbers are big and they probably go away in a hurry, but the Corps has $2 billion a year for study, design, construction, operation, and maintenance. Not $2 billion, probably goes away in a hurry, but to at least look at doing a study with their modeling of could they design a better entrance to the harbor, because we lost some of the harbor wall anyhow that they're going to need to address because that's theirs. So in that, if they could design a better entrance to the harbor, basically an overlapping one that kicks out a little bit, that might prevent this. I mean, it's the ounce of prevention idea. Instead of spending right now to get to a 5-foot level in the harbor and the upstream and downstream side, to get back to where it would have originally been, the dredging fees are about $1.9 million. And that's not something we can sustain. So can we operate the marina on your behalf and through rental fees, etc., and maintain the marina? Absolutely. Maintaining the harbor was never the intention, and it's getting to the point where it's not sustainable.
Else? Question? Bill?
Where's the estimates of dollars that you're using coming from?
We had Superior and Newt Marine both come in and give us a quote. So they came in, surveyed, and quoted.
And they didn't give you any indication of where disposal areas were?
Well, disposal is a whole another issue. Part of that we're having to find on our own, finding farmlands, etc. We used to bring it to some city property, I think by Marquette Street, and I've been told that's not an option anymore. So then the further we go, the more expensive it gets from a trucking standpoint. So there's farmers who are in favor of taking it upstream. We've had soil tests done and everything is good to go there, but that additional trucking cost us. So again, if the Corps were to come in with their barge that they could dredge and pump into their barge with the different filters through it, then they take it and offload it somewhere else, and we don't have to deal with that either.
I've worked on entrances to many harbors up and down the Mississippi, and your statements are true that the entrance causes problems, and there are technical ways to help correct that.
Absolutely. And in the binder, if you guys get a chance to look at, Pat has the one as well as Steve, but it shows the original proposed design, and it shows an overlapping and a kick out, and that would prevent this eddy from happening. There'd still be an eddy, but the eddy would be out in the channel instead of coming into. And I mean, it seriously at fast moving water also causes a safety issues. The boats come in and they hit that eddy and it throws them in. A boat may or may not have gone up against the wall about a week ago, entering in high water and maybe too fast. So it does create a safety concern as well.
I would respectfully disagree with your statements pertinent to the work that Lunda's doing in the river caused the siltation. They had to dig for caissons, but they did not have to do a lot of digging. That's a professional opinion that could vary.
And there may be ways to quantify that with the water plant right there. They have to do turbidity tests on their water they bring into the plant. That could probably be quantified as well.
Yeah, their specifications require siltation measures, and I can't believe the DOT would let them get away without doing it. The question I got is, if the Corps basically, what you said, admits that it's their responsibility to dredge it,
Yes, sir.
but they don't have a source of income today. Do we know how much is actually in the water bill appropriation for that purpose? They've got the responsibility to do that to every set of harbors up and down the Mississippi River.
Right. I have there in the binders the 2020 budget, and it goes through their discretionary funds. They have Inland Waterways Trust Fund, which is $54 million. They have $210 million specifically for the Mississippi River and her tributaries. So now where those $210 million are being spent, I can't tell you, but that's your 2020 budget. I assume the 2019 budget's similar.
So it would appear to me that the best avenue to get it done is to somehow bring, I guess, political pressure on the Corps to spend some of that money and dredge it.
And that's what we attempted to do with Senator Ernst and Senator Grassley's office. And
Is that you? Is that just
that was myself, another member of the board, meeting with the
not
representatives.
the city?
Correct.
My thought is the city are the people that ought to be working directly with you to turn
And I
this
think
thing
that's
around.
part why we're here, and why we then engaged Pat and Steve is to get you guys on board. It's your marina, and we very much enjoy using it and managing it on your behalf. But there's only so much we can do.
Thank you.
So, Pat, would it be appropriate now for us to maybe have Steve write a letter to the three, discussing that we've had this meeting and we want further discussion, and we're very interested in their help, and as a commission, we would like to follow up with all three of them. You're going to meet with the
I agree with
representative.
Dee. I think that we need to take pressure and it's the city's responsibility. The Corps' got to dredge it. We got to bring the pressure to bear to say we got to have help to do it, and they need our help.
Steve? Can you
So
got that? Do we need a motion, or is
I was gonna say a resolution. Yeah.
want a resolution doing it?
Do you want to do that in this meeting?
Sure.
Well, I think we should.
I think so too. Okay.
Do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we, I want to make a motion that we adopt a resolution that encourages our legislators to work with the Corps, and that we would, I think you're going to have to lay it out, but lay out the problem, that we recognize it, and we need the help of our three elected officials to work with the Corps to get funding for this. It's a very important asset to our community, a recreational asset, and it needs to be preserved. And we would like to further have them help us find a way to have the Corps put this on their list for review in terms of the design and being able to propose a design and a method to fix it. So that's what it should contain. So that's my motion.
I'll second it.
You got that, Carl?
Use a word stronger than encourage? You want to use appeal or assist or,
Compel.
I'll let Steve work it out.
if you want to,
Steve, you want to?
Compel.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a sense of urgency.
Urgency,
Because
thank
this
you.
is,
That's what
this
I'm
is the
thinking.
boating season, assuming the Mississippi ever gets back within its banks, is coming up, the boating season, and this is not some long-range plan. This is a relatively immediate type thing. Not tomorrow, but I mean, I think a sense of urgency needs to be, mentioned in this request, I think.
if it weren't for this crest, we would have Superior in their dredging starting tomorrow. Because if we don't spot dredge, we've got a couple dozen slips that we just can't utilize. And/or we're causing damage to boats as they drag into them. So we're doing that at our expense in hopes that maybe we can get some reimbursement, but we have to do it.
With, not necessarily within the context of the resolution that's before us, but to request information in order to decide on that. You had mentioned that you are presently retiring certain loans that have been used previously for the same purpose. And I know this is a perennial chronic problem. It's been a problem as long as I have been following or participating in city government. The silt line from the Iowa-Illinois Memorial Bridge to the front door of the Davenport Harbor, where you're operating on our behalf, is a straight one, and it silts in all the time. And this is not the first time I visited this issue on behalf of the Davenport Harbor. So, have any of those loans that previously expenses you've undertaken ever been reimbursed? Have you pursued a reimbursement from the Corps through the document that you presented indicating their responsibility?
I'll turn around and look at, by the way, I'm sure you're familiar with our Commodore. It's the first female Commodore, but I don't think it's ever been, it's no. So again, we keep doing new loans and consolidating loans and lines of credit or whatever. So we're spending all of our money servicing loans instead of rebuilding and upgrading the marine itself. Yeah.
Well, is it time to appeal to the judiciary? I mean, you've been to the executive and you've been to the legislative branch. Is it time to involve the judiciary branch and pursue your request to be made whole for your loss, for our loss, for the city's loss, in some adjudicated manner?
I would appreciate whatever the commission thinks is the best route to go.
Anybody else? We have a resolution, so all those in favor of these resolutions say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Steve, you're going to write a resolution, circulate it, and we'll check off on in using electronic means. Okay, thank you.
Hey, Steve, have you heard anything from the city staff as far as the DOT or any of the?
No, and just received those silt numbers just like last week. I was kind of waiting for those. When we met, we were waiting for those numbers so that we had a comparison. So this is very timely.
Thank you. Next,
Before we leave the topic, what do you anticipate is your new incurred level of expense relative to the emergency dredging that you're undertaking in the immediate future?
I believe the current spot dredging that we've commissioned is $160,000.
I think you mentioned that previously.
Yeah.
I just didn't write it down. Thank you.
next thing on the agenda is the Union Station discussion. Steve?
Yep. So we're, nope, actually, item B,
Rates.
the
Sorry.
rent
Rents.
adjustment
Rents.
proposal for
Rent adjustment
flood-impacted
for the-
tenants.
oh,
So this is what I alluded to during the
Okay.
previous discussion in this meeting. I'd be happy to answer any
Everybody's got-
questions.
Got that in the packet. You want to explain a little bit, Steve? Want to go ahead and?
Sure. So I've broken it out specifically. The Union Station tenants have it included in their agreement that we approve, that each day that they're out of the, have to be evacuated, they're out of the office would be, abated, that rent. Freight House does not have it included per se in the same way, those tenants, but I would tell you that River Drive has not been opened since mid-March in that area. and those effects are profoundly being affected, or felt, I should say, by each of those tenants each of our tenants that occupy the Freight House. We are trying to do a number of things. We put together an event a couple weeks ago, and it rained. We had donated bands and live music, decent number of people. It moved inside, but it didn't. It needs to be much more than the occasional event, which we intend to do throughout the summer to help move people back. I would say this weekend, Friday, Saturday, even Sunday, when there was decent weather, we know people know that the Freight House still exists, and so those businesses were doing very well. And so it has just been very difficult, even from, not even speaking of the flood, but just the first of the year with the inundation of the snow and all of that. So Chairman Walton and I talked, and I put this before you as something to consider as it relates to encouraging the tenants that we have and abiding by, in some form, our agreements with the others. It is my hope that the June ones, maybe perhaps we won't see the entire month, but I think with this additional crest, we're probably going to see well into the month of June.
Questions for Steve? Or-
Yeah, so this sheet that we see, it's April, May, and June. Those are these the adjusted rents, or is this what they are going to pay? Or, because all 3 months are the same on the ones that have 3 months of rent.
Right, so this is taking those 3 months for these particular tenants and forgiving those months.
Oh, we're
and
totally
totaling
forgiving, we're
those up
totally
by
forgiving
month.
what we see on this sheet.
Correct. So as you see, the amount is almost $35,000. It's not small. And it would eliminate, as I alluded to earlier, the projected fund balance
Yeah,
and then some.
okay, thank you.
I think every one of our agreements, at least while I've been on the commission, all read about the same. The landlord and the tenant agree that each shall cooperate with emergency service utility personnel or flood control personnel in the event of a flood. If events require the tenant to move out of occupancy because of the flooding, the rent shall be abated for that time period that the tenancy is not possible. That's an agreement we have.
The Union Station is completely out of commission. I drove down there last week and had lunch at the Nostalgia Farms Deli, which the Freight House businesses are. I didn't personally visit each and every one, but I think all of them are back in operation, are they not?
Correct, at
Yeah.
this time.
Is there a prorated May discount then that we could consider for the fact that they have reoccupied and businesses have reopened?
Yeah, you can feel free to do anything with this
Well,
particular.
do we have days or dates in front of us? I mean,
They were only at the Freight House closed officially for like 10 days, officially. So what's factoring into this is the closure of River Drive, which is has been a huge effect.
Of course it
even
is.
Even if they've not officially been closed. So some stayed open, but that closure and that inaccessibility has had some strong effect.
Yeah, I'm inclined to move the motion with the entire month abated. And one of the reasons is when you drive there, you see road closed, and you can't really see around River Drive, and you don't know if there's a parking lot full of water. And that's an I mean, one, we should from now on, because this water's not going away anytime soon, have at least a signage there that says, Freight House parking lot open, where people know that they can safely drive. I mean, they can see no water, drive across River Drive and get to the parking lot. I think that would be very helpful. Also, it would probably be helpful if the farmers market is, is going to be there on Saturday. The attendance, because I'm patronizing these places because of their difficulty, is down considerably. And I think our one of our goals is to help economic development and boost it as we can. I think we need to keep these tenants, and this is just a very small nod in their direction that we understand their pain. The Union Station, I mean, I don't know when they'll get back. That'll be the next discussion. But for the Freight House, we just need to say that we support them. And I think that we should forgo the rent.
Any other comments? Bill?
Yeah, I agree with Dee. I think from a PR standpoint, as Steve alluded earlier, the long-range outlook of all these tenants looks very, very strong. And I think if they understand that we are sympathetic to their problem, they're more likely to re-up when their lease is up the next time around. And I think we should definitely do what we originally planned or thought. It was mentioned here about just skipping it for this time and create tremendous positive PR between our tenants and us as a commission.
I'm not disinclined to agree with either of the previous speakers. Why does River Drive remain closed? I mean, I've driven River Drive under color of commissioner inspecting Riverfront or whatever for whatever reason, but River Drive is being driven by local traffic and is drivable. Why does it remain closed?
I think I'm talking about long stretches of it.
Yes,
so
but adjacent to the dry areas where our businesses, where these particular businesses are located, from one could say Gain Street to maybe Perry, easily Perry. There doesn't seem to be any reason for River Drive to be closed, or for Perry, Maine, Brady, all those streets that are, vertically intersect River Drive to be barricaded as well, which I also couldn't help but notice when I was down there driving around.
For the last week,
Yeah, for the last week.
but before that, it was 50 days.
Sure.
Carl,
And I'm not
you
disinclined
were in
to.
Europe.
No, I was.
Right. It has not been
We
the
saw- It's
case.
not our tenants' fault that.
No, of course not. I'm not opposing this at all. I'm asking a question about going forward. Why hasn't River Drive reopened as soon as it was possible to do so in the areas that are most
It has.
integral to
That's right.
our discussion?
It has in sections. I mean, it really has. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that. It has, I mean, I'm not the right person probably to answer that, but. I realize that you're not. Right.
Alderman Grip, can you help?
I believe for the most part, the last week I was able to go to and from work with River Drive open. But now that we're heading back towards somewhere around 21 feet, I think we're heading back to everything being closed again. So I would anticipate I'll be going through Moline to get to work from now on as well. So for that long stretch, it was closed. It was open for the last week. That was nice, but now we're heading back up to 21, and I think we're going to be closed again for a few weeks.
So it was open for a week. I see. Okay. I must have missed that particular moment. Thank you both.
We have a motion,
So moved.
a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Same sign, nay. Motion carries. Union Station? Steve?
I don't know if it matters which place to go, but keep it entertaining a little bit. But so I wanted to provide a bit of an update related to Union Station, and just so you can kind of know more directly about the situation there. So it was a May 1st, about 6:30 that evening. I received a call that the water was being taken. We were taking on water behind the HESCOs. It was not a HESCO breach. You can see very clearly, if you're on site today, that there was in the bricked parking lot in a section just upstream or east of the Package Express deck, right where the HESCO kind of turned and connected to the building, because it forms a circular barrier, had breached, had washed out, had caved in. It still is pretty obvious today. It's probably worth noting that it's an adjacent area where one of our let me be clear, I'm not blaming this. I'm saying there are variables, and one of them, this is in a directly adjacent space to where the grease trap for the restaurant for Package Express had, just before the flooding, had been dug. Okay, and so you can kind of see how all that currently physically kind of ties together. And so I think there's a heck of a lot of water for a long period of time. And so it breached underneath. It has pumps. All of that was in place. What wasn't behind the HESCO were some steel plates that had been used several times before, but notably, I did some checking in the last several years, like 10, had not. The plates, since HESCO, so I don't know if 10 is the right number, but the plates, when the HESCO started to be used, the plates use was diminished. Those were used mostly when the area was sandbagged. But this time, currently, today, as of Friday, plates are up and sandbagged around, and then the HESCOs are creating a first line of defense, and then the plates are a second line of defense. And so it's heavily fortified. I will tell you, at my insistence, I think that that was the only way to go, because what has happened since the initial breach, we did take on about 2 feet of water inside the main building. And we were able to, the city was able to get in there quickly. We had a Warner Restoration in there for 2 weeks, drying. It looked like the set of E.T. with these generator contraptions and blowing and drying, dehumidifying, and removing drywall where applicable, cleaning, sanitizing, removing, drying contents, some of which was mostly trash, to be honest with you, some stuff that probably was left over and needed to be cleaned up previously from a tenant previous. I will tell you that no water, this is good news, no water was flowed through the main level of the Package Express building next door. The basement, as intended and many times before, filled. It has a sump pump. The main building has 2 sump pumps. We lost a newly installed water heater that we had agreed to do for that tenant, but this is one of those examples I alluded to earlier where the flood account has picked up for the replacement of that because it's no good. It got so totally submerged. We're right now getting quotes for replacement of all of the sump pumps. Currently, we've got 2 of the 3, one in each building, working, and I've been down there multiple times today, and then they're working, and that's good to keep up on that. We're keeping that lower level. There's a crawl space in the main building and an actual lower level in the Package Express building, and our goal is to keep that, keep those working. But they have some age on them. They all did get wet, and if there's an opportunity here for replacement, and these aren't just your regular household ones, these are big, large. When we had the guys out there, everyone kept commenting, wow, these are mammoth, they used that term. So, but they're also, we don't know their longevity, and so we want to if there's an opportunity for replacement and to get some brand new, because those do a lot of work, and we need those as an extra line of defense as well. So here's the thing, related to that Warner restoration, drying and dehumidifying. There's been the cleaning, the sanitizing, and a hygienist as part of this has come in and done testing. It takes 10 days for those findings to come back. We're probably a handful of days, maybe later this week, early next, from receiving those findings. If things check out, there's really, and the flood, this next crest goes away soon, there's really no reason why we can't get the upper level tenants, of which there are 3, back up there while we work with the incoming one that we don't yet have an agreement with. That's Visit Quad Cities, but they're still interested in coming in. We'll ratify an agreement at an upcoming meeting here, but there's no reason why we wouldn't work in tandem with them while the upper level tenants reoccupy, and then get things back to normal. The Taste of Ethiopia restaurant, obviously their opening has been pushed back a few times. I think we're now at least into the latter part of June, because I can't really do much until the water goes back down and we do the cleanup and we know that we're out of the woods for that. So there's some domino pieces here. We would have been further along had the flood sort of been in our past, and we wouldn't be revisiting a new one. But that's our reality right now. So what questions might you have?
Are they pumping from a sump or pumping the surface?
The sumps are right now, they will have to do both as it rises.
Tell me a little bit about insurance on the building and what the estimated damage is.
Don't have an estimate on damages, but the insurance, this is where it's going to be a city CIP, or flood account, whatever we want to call it. Either way, city dollars, because the insurance is, I believe, $50,000 on building and $10,000 on contents. So the adjuster's been out. We've already exceeded that for the cleanup, I'm sure. So the restoration and all of that. Actually, it's a lot of drywall. I mean, a lot of the cleanup, we saved a lot by getting in there, in my opinion, because had we let it sit and mold and whatnot, what comes with that, the smell, all of that's non-existent. We were able to get in there quickly, swiftly, and comprehensively. They just left on Friday. And so we keep it dry now with the heavy fortification. I think that the restoration could go pretty quickly, and we could actually see the new tenant in there and everyone else very soon.
I'm a little disappointed that we lost Union Station. I actually was a staff person who got the federal money to mitigate the building. It has lasted with water up against the building, with the metal bars, the metal plates in place. I mean, those are just doors, so if anything comes in underneath a HESCO barrier, let alone a little bit of a breach, it's going to come straight in the doors. So that's a disappointment. I think we need to review how the building is operated during a flood, how it's protected, and where the HESCO barriers in the future should be placed, if that's what we use. And if there are other means of mitigating. I mean, we have tenants. And I feel beyond responsible, because it's in a floodplain, and we tell people not to be in a floodplain, but we're very happy to have tenants in the floodplain. So we really, really need to be at the top of our game when we work on floodproofing and when we work on trying to save a building. And so, again, I'm a bit disappointed. I hope this all works out, and I hope we figure out definitely a different strategy going forward to protect the building.
I would also add, I appreciate that, and I would also add that I think a future discussion for the commission is going to be the aged parking lot, bricked parking lot. I don't want to necessarily invoke it here, but we're obviously going to have to fix that area, and there's obviously a high water table right now, but always really in that area. I think we need to be mindful of perhaps building into the existing infrastructure the HESCO element, so that when it goes up, that we have full confidence that there's stability lying beneath of it, because I'm not sure that we can go forward today or even in 3 years and feel that with 100-year-old bricked and I'm not dissing brick. It could still be brick, but what I'm saying is that to me, you almost need a redo of that. You almost need to break it out and re-fortify it and bring and re-brick it or do something else with that. I'm talking about the area immediately surrounding the building itself.
I agree with you, and I think if the federal government, if we get appropriation, it comes down from the state, there'll be mitigation funds following a flood that's statewide. And so we need a plan here. That's what I mean. We need to look at the strategy of how we're going to protect this building, because there'll be mitigation dollars. And the mitigation dollars, that's how the original building was mitigated. So the whole idea of what the parking lot ought to look like, where you set the HESCO barriers, all those things that we should be doing. Are those steel plates the easiest thing to put in place? Is there something different? Are there thresholds? All those things need to be looked at, because that can be then wrapped up as one of those projects in that mitigation funds.
I got a question for Dee. Dee, in your former position, did they have a written flood plan, like for the building, and what they were supposed to do?
Yes. Yes, there absolutely was one. And so I'm not sure. I think the last 7 or 8 years reliance on HESCO barriers it's shown in this flood that there needs to be a lot of work put into those varying situations, and this might be one of them. With dirt and sandbags, everybody wanted secondary protection, and so there was always built everywhere secondary protection in case the original failed. And I think we had just too much confidence in HESCO barriers, and so the secondary protection either wasn't installed or wasn't thought about or contemplated during the plan.
Thank you, that's what I thought you'd say.
Anybody else? Bill?
Yeah, Alderman Grip, you might know this, and Steve, you might as well. I assume the city did the, whatever that's called, that goes around Modern Woodman Park, whatever that system is that we have in place now that seems to be very effective, quite frankly. What do we, the city, I assume, paid for that, whatever the cost was? Anybody know that?
It was a
dollars?
Flood mitigation, right? Mm-hmm. Probably a share of that.
Okay, so that does seem to be very effective, is it not? I mean, what we have in place around Modern Woodman Park, it seems to be doing very well, isn't it? Is that something that we could consider, or is that out of the question in terms of cost to protect the Union Station area or something like that?
So what you're referring to is a demountable structural flood situation, I think. I mean, if you're referencing
as opposed to the HESCO barriers, it
right.
may or may not work or whatever.
So what I would say from a staff standpoint is it bears discussion with this group and the council and staff and all of those stakeholders for the future. It's a costly thing. There might be dollars for it, but it might also be tough to show on the cost benefit analysis, an 80-20 match, or that's sizable for the local share. And so, but it certainly bears a discussion.
Those mountables has those pillars. I mean, you don't see them at John O'Donnell because they're kind of built into the wall and how it works. But if you did that, you would have every, 10 or 15 feet, these you'd have to put in these big Ballard pillars because you mount these in.
Right.
And that would have to come all the way around. So that would be, I think that would be kind of tough, but that's why I think we need to step back and decide what we're going to protect, how we're going to protect it, and then what is the remedy there. So I think everything's on the table, but we really need to look at it now, because those monies will be coming up here in the next 6 to 8 months if they come through.
What you see on the surface at John O'Donnell is easy to do. It's a levee and it's removable panels. But what works at John O'Donnell is a slurry trench around there. Everything underground is cut off. So you got a real problem in downtown Davenport when you start looking at stuff on the surface. It's easy to cut it off on the surface. Think of all the old utilities and backfill that's been placed. That's the real problem in fighting floods in Davenport.
And during surges, storm like yesterday, a lot of backup in intakes in and around our riverfront because things are so saturated and full.
When it rained hard yesterday, I said to I was sitting on the swing and I said to my wife, they're going to find out what interior drainage is all about. Because they got a levee built and it's going to rain and there's no place for the water to go. It can't run out the pipes, and you got to pump it over the top of the levee then.
That's right. That's right.
Kyle, you got any comments?
I agree with what Dee said, and I think everything is on the table. And I think as we evaluate what we do going forward, it's going to be a combination of the HESCO barriers, those temporary barriers that we have around Modern Woodman, maybe some other options, and we need to decide as a city, what are we going to protect, to what level are we going to protect it, and then what are the means that we have. So to answer Bill's question, can we do it? Absolutely, we could do it. We have to decide, is that the level of protection you want for that particular building, or will a different level of protection suffice that maybe is a better use of resources? As far as the city standpoint goes, the after action review, we're going to look at that flood plan, and we'll particularly look at each aspect of it. So as far as Union Station goes, what was the plan for Union Station at what foot level, and then was it executed according to the plan? And if it wasn't, why not? And if it was and it still failed, then what do you need to put in place so that it doesn't fail next time? So there will be lessons learned, and what I'm certain of is that we will be better protected during the next, historic flood than we were for this one. So, yeah. Well,
Alderman, thank you. When does that after-action review take place?
that's a good question, and that's probably a question I'll push to have answered at our next management update, because I think there's kind of been we need a sentiment from our administration that we need the water to go down before we start an after-action review, which maybe there's some truth to that, but maybe we can be doing both. As Dee said, in the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to have these opportunities, so you don't want to be having these conversations in 6 months. You want to be ahead of the, if here's the money that's available, you want to have a plan for how you would use that money. So I would push to have that after action review start sooner than later, but I don't have a timetable for you yet.
So move on to the riverfront.
I'll just stay here, and I know there might be some other people who want to talk about this, both in front of me and behind me. But so I placed it on the agenda for that purpose. I would just by way of an update for each of you, there are 6 in the downtown area, basically Marquette to Perry, 6 crossings, 4 of which have, as of Friday, have been temporarily opened with gradient and asphalt that it goes on top of it. This is in an effort to gain access to the other side at this point, right? I mean, both from Perry, we have a tenant down there, LeClaire Park from Harrison now, you know, Marquette, very important with the fuel station and Public Works operations, as well as Centennial Park and so many other things, and then Gaines Street as well. So the idea, the notion, that the information I have coming from Canadian Pacific and the city and Public Works is that these 4 are temporary, have been temporarily done. To begin then with the 2 on a permanent fix, so like Ripley Street will be one of the first to have a permanent crossing, their permanent design implemented, working in close concert with engineers and Public Works staff, but all of these would be done by fall or into the fall, finished with the last one permanently done. The permanent solution at Gaines Street because of the season. So the idea was, you know, to get that access for the baseball season and all of that, but it needs to, you can't work on it and have access at the same time. And so they were trying to work in concert with those scenarios. I will tell you that as long as there's access at Harrison, my concern at Ripley, because the way this grading was going to be, you can see there would have been great trouble to get out in and out of the southmost egress in and out of the freight house. We have 2, but the one closest to the railroad tracks, and then the access point off Ripley to the Union Station is going to be very difficult too. I did see where they accomplished that. I'll put that in quotes, but on the Harrison side, where you can, I've driven it, you can do it. It is a change, no doubt about it. I'm not covering, I'm not protecting, I'm not defending or anything, no doubt about it. This is a drastic change of 2+ feet in some places, but it is also done, right? I mean, it's a reality, and so from a staff standpoint, working with many others here, trying to make sure that the ultimate design of Main Street Landing, the build out of Main Street Landing, incorporates this new reality into the mix, so that we have all of these, you know, in many cases, these pedestrian as well as vehicular accesses, so we're not separated from this bisected element of our riverfront on a permanent basis. And so incorporating that into a design is going to take all of us making sure that happens. To that end, just today, city administrator wanted me to make mention to you all about your involvement in a discussion related to the Riverfront Trail, because obviously it runs parallel to the railroad, the newly raised railroad. And so, you know, should we not all have a design discussion about, do we lift it up to a level that matches the new railroad and give some viewing points along the way, kind of lifting it up? Otherwise, you've got some pooling issues if you don't do this kind of in concert, okay? And so there's a design piece to all of this that needs some discussed, and of course we should be and will be at that table. And so I wanted to bring those things up, and then, like I said, I know there's others that want to speak about this as well.
Question, Steve, briefly, what would the permanent versions of these egress ways, or wherever ramps you want to call them, what will those look like that are different than these temporary ones?
Those all are currently under design. I mean, they're being looked at or contemplated between the railroad and Public Works. I've not seen those at this point, but I assume that they will be shared widely.
I don't even know where to begin, I guess. what the railroad effectively did in the flood was give us the 1983 flood wall in a very harsh manner. And we should not be accommodating the railroad. We should not be talking about raising the bike path so it can have a view shed. We should be looking at our Main Street landing plan and talking to the railroad about their participation in mitigating what they caused. It's a railroad yard to me when I look at it. And I think that's how the railroad sees their ownership. And when I was down there a couple of weeks ago walking it, they were open burning garbage. And I had to say, whoa, this looks like garbage. You can't open burn in Davenport. You're not in the county. And so they've taken on, my understanding is that they've been talking to the city for quite some time about raising it. Would have been nice to know when the RDG plan was being worked on that we could have worked in a plan with RDG and the railroad. Because I believe that just that these temporary roadways or their idea of a permanent roadway is acceptable, it's not acceptable. You know, we have a $55 million plan that just goes from Harrison to the dam. That's not counting all of the other plans that we want to do. And we should not be forced to spending our money or spending our time on lifting up a bike path when the bike path, yes, should be reconsidered. And if the land is coming up 2.5 to 3 feet, then we should look at all of it. But this should be a holistic plan. Otherwise, we're going to be left with a asphalt hump to get across the railroad. And they'll be fine with it. I can't even imagine as a pedestrian, let alone like a person like me, let alone a person in a wheelchair trying to go over Main Street. And we should never give up any one of those ways of getting to our river. That's the other thing that I've been hearing in the discussion. Oh, maybe we should just look at less opportunities to cross the railroad. We should never give up any of those opportunities. We should be working with the railroad in a way that they have to come to the table because I feel like they've damaged us. And, I don't know the law. I don't know why we feel that, it's superior. This is what we have. It's reality. Yes, it is reality, but it's not my reality. It's not what I want to see for our riverfront in the future. I don't think anybody around this dais wants to see that as our future. So we really need to take this as an opportunity, and we should be putting those plans in front of them so they know what our end game is. It's just not that it's handicap accessible. So I had to get that off my chest. I mean, just watching it, being here in 1983 and listening to people who were afraid that if they were in a car, they couldn't see the river. I mean, now we have a fairly ugly view. It's not a good flood wall even because, it's rock and it's going to drain. But we either need to go to a plan like RDG has done for the city and move it up 2.5 feet to meet the railroad, or we have to figure out how they're going to mitigate it.
Bill's next, and I think he has some legal questions. So I'm going to call Ralph Henniger. We're lucky enough to have Ralph, a distinguished lawyer from.
Before you leave, Steve, there's no plan for the railroad to return the rail to its original rail bed. That is out of the question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Ralph?
Good evening, and what I was going to say, I've just discarded because after listening to Commissioner D. Bremer, what it comes right down to is the public convenience and necessity is a decision that is made by the city. It is not made by the railroad. And and as you all know, I've been a lawyer a long time, and what I have done prior to coming here was do a little reading about the subject matter, and generally I think I can say that the condition of the plan, which Commissioner Bremer mentioned, and the condition of our levee before the railroad raised the tracks is the key to which the railroad must be held under the public convenience and necessity, and it's up to the city to come up with what is reasonable for the railroad to do. But it is not for the railroad to decide what they think is to be done. And I think the article I read in the paper today also concerned me because it looked like the article, for those of you that may not have read it, the article in essence says that the city and the railroad have been coming up with a plan, and that the plan is to build ramps. And I think what Ms. Bremer just said is exactly right. My son, who's a bicyclist, and he, being my partner in the law firm, comes in by bicycle because he lives up on the river, and he couldn't carry his bicycle over the railroad track because it was too high. I've also had the unfortunately experience to have to push a few people in wheelchairs lately, and you cannot expect someone to push a wheelchair either up or down a ramp, particularly going down. It'll be like the joke, who's going to push grandma off the cliff? I mean, she'll go into the river. So in essence, I'd be glad to answer any questions. I was invited here by Kathy Wine of River Action. I provided her with a little bit of a briefing ahead of time. And so at this point, if there are questions, I'd be glad to try and address them.
Thanks for what you said, Ralph. I've been in your office at various times and read lots of records pertinent to the initial railroads that were built in this area. So as an example, every time that a major railroad got built here, there was usually an agreement with the railroad what they had to do. For example, at 13th Street or Elm Street, where we have bridges, there is a agreement in place that says the railroad must maintain a bridge there for a wagon. Okay? That's an agreement that exists, and it's evidently being negotiated again, or at least the railroad's sticking by what the agreement says. But the same thing's true, I think, of the railroad that's running along the riverfront. And there has to be agreements that exist in the beginning with that track and the city of Davenport. Plus, when the Corps built the navigation pool, they moved the tracks. In fact, there used to be a rail yard down what we think of LeClaire Park. So when they started to move those things, there had to be agreements with the city. And I believe somebody has to do some research here and find out what those agreements say. Go to Bettendorf. A track runs through Bettendorf. It goes through a gated closure structure built by the Corps. It's got a fixed elevation, and it's by signed agreement between the railroad and Bettendorf. You come to the water plant, there's a gated closure on the upstream end and the downstream end. There's a written agreement what the elevation of that track can be there. You can keep coming down, and you get fixed elevations that are set by agreements everywhere. I don't see how the railroad can just start violating those agreements without somebody stopping them. You're talking about the grade of a bike path next to the railroad. There's a right-of-way line out there. They can't get past the right-of-way line. I negotiated an agreement with the railroad to put the bike path from Davenport to Bettendorf along the riverfront because they wanted a fence. There's no fence there today because we sat down with the railroad and told them, if you want a goddamn fence, build the fence. We're not going to build it. So I think there's a major gap here between the city and the railroad as far as working out a negotiation. I heard somebody just say, Dee, that somebody knew this was going to happen. How could you know it was going to happen and not have done something? So I believe that we need to have some legal research done to see what those agreements are, because I can't believe there aren't agreements. You got grade crossings with very strict, DOT rules of what grade crossings are, and they just raise the grade. Somebody has to approve that grade crossing before they did it. Everything else I ever worked on as an engineer, we had to go work with the DOT and the cities to make sure those things are all in agreement. So,
Well, the city has, the state has the ultimate authority. The state can delegate to the city its responsibility to see that the railroad does do what is correct. And the police power is what gives you, everyone probably thinks, gee, the railroad's the railroad, they can do what they want. Actually, that is not true at all. The railroad is subservient to whatever the state determines that they should do, and the test is what is reasonable. And I think what happened, listening to the fact that perhaps there had been some discussion going on that no one really knew about the railroad track, the flood was just a convenient opportunity for the railroad to do what they thought they could do, and basically, I'm going to say, probably get away with it. And now we find ourselves faced with a situation where the track has already been raised to a height which I think is much higher than 22 inches. And obviously the railroad has spent probably millions of dollars now on a track, and we are faced as a city to look at what is the public need to maintain its access to the riverfront in the same manner that it was before the track was built. So Commissioner Ashton and I agree. I think what the city should do is get some expert advice, and both planning advice and very good legal advice. And the railroad has very good lawyers, so you need to get very good advice. But I agree with both of what you had to say.
let me make sure everybody understands what the railroad had to do. They come down the track and they reach the government bridge, and there's a viaduct there. I fought floods when I was in the Corps. At 18 and a half stage in the river, the water runs on the surface of River Drive and runs into viaduct. You can no longer pump. They're pumping the river, so you can't do it. So if you go down there, and I walked them, they built sandbag closure dike along both sides of the railroad, and when they got down by the end of the dam, they cut it off, and they can pump because the water cannot run into viaduct. Now they can go into the viaduct and come out, and now they wanted to raise it so they can keep operating traffic. All that happened.
Yeah, I'm concerned that we're working with the railroad now, which they're going to use as that we have agreed to what's going on. And I don't think we should be in an agreement that what they have done in the water and the flood is something that we want. And so I'm a little, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be concerned. I am very concerned with conversations like maybe we don't need every access point. Maybe we should be talking about raising the bike path. We shouldn't be talking about any of those things because really the railroad has damaged us, and we need to figure out what would mitigate it, what would bring it back to where it was before. And that it is that discussion or statement is what we should go forward with the railroad. But the more that we work with them in this temporary and this then designing a permanent, way over a couple of streets is going to put them in the position that they've done what they needed to do and the city is acquiesced. It looks like we've given the staff, or whoever's discussing with them, the authority to negotiate this as the settlement, and we're not there. We're nowhere reached a settlement with what the railroad has done to us. That is still to be determined. So that gives me a little bit of concern.
Well, I agree with you, because when they began working right away to show that there was a ramp, that is a very good indication that the intent of the railroad was to say, this is what we're going to do. And basically, they're going to say, that's what we talked to the city about, that's what we're doing. So somehow the city needs to come up with a plan, and the plan should be, don't do any further work until we come up with an agreed plan, and then go forward with that plan. But the further you go, the more difficult it's going to be.
Yeah, I actually think the policymakers have to say, you know, we've seen a couple temporary ramps here. Okay, that's good. We can get to the other side. Temporary is temporary. It comes out. But permanent is something totally different, and that discussion has to be made. And just because these temporary ramps are in place, it doesn't mean we're going to settle for ramps.
I agree with Dee. I don't see how you can start until you know the legal basis that there's so many rules that reach the crossings, the right of way, the fixed elevations. We need to know what our legal basis is for going after them, because I'm just guessing as an engineer they probably violated a hell of a lot of rules, and we need to know that as we start negotiating with them.
Thank you.
Kyle, do you have any comment about this?
I don't think so right now. I think, you know, if you guys want to talk about the legal stuff, that we should probably have our legal counsel here to talk to you about that. And it's certainly a discussion we need to have. But I don't think I can appropriately comment on it.
Okay.
I asked several people about the railroad that is running right smack through our Riverfront property last week. Several of them were under the impression that, the railroad will be taking that back out after the flood threat has gone away in June. And I thought, well, I could have lived with that. As I'm learning this evening, that doesn't appear to be anybody's intention, that the railroad make us whole for the damage that we're obviously sustaining, being denied access to our river, having an eyesore driven through the heart of our proposed $55 million park expansion. I also am literally struck dumb by the idea that this could just arbitrarily happen, that the railroad just decided to start laying railroads and stone and pave their way through downtown Davenport. And the notion that someone in the administration may have actually been privy to this idea and checked off on this idea is beyond belief. And I think we need to find out an answer to that question. If there have been conversations between the city and the administration, and if the administration in any way, either tacitly or overtly, said sure that this was an acceptable arrangement on Davenport's point of view, I think that needs to be brought out. I think that, we want to learn how to do floods better every time we don't do them perfectly. Getting to the ballpark, just driving around looking at the incredible scarring of the river by that installation of that rail, it's appalling. It's just appalling.
Yeah. So as far as I don't know if you were asking for a response or not, but yeah, we do, absolutely. And our first management update after this happened, there was a lot of we were very upset, and we brought up a lot of this stuff. There was no sign off from our city administration to do this. The railroad essentially, in the days preceding doing it, said, yeah, we're going to do this. We have the rights to do it. And then they did it. From what I've been told, their responsibility is to return each of the intersections to grade. So they have to regrade them, and I don't know what the timeline is for that. Now, we've asked, is there, what else do we have? Because we don't like this. We don't care for this. We would rather it not be like this. So far, I think the city administration has said, well, we don't think we have a leg to stand on here. But if there are folks who think otherwise, then perhaps we ought to push that way and see what matters of recourse we have. So, yes, we were upset, the same as you are. We had this conversation publicly. Has it been a month now? Maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago, we had this same conversation. And like I said, that's what I was told. The railroad can do this. Their responsibility is to bring the intersections back to grade, and that is what the staff is working with them to do.
Thank you, Kyle. Else for staff report? I want to make a comment then. I want to thank you, Steve, for what you've been doing through this all. I mean, we've got a lot of properties, 18 properties that you've been worried about and taking care of, and I'm sure you've worked long hours and had a lot of stress. So I think as a commission, we appreciate what you've done here. So thank you, commission. That leaves public with business. Bill? You. No, you didn't know that.
I'm Bill Handel, a retired architect who grew up in Davenport, and I've been intensely interested in the Riverfront since 2014. Not quite that long, thinking about the past, but 2014 when the presentation was made at the Figge for the River Vision at that time, and I was quite happy to see the work that Hargraves and the city had put together on that. And then I was just as unimpressed and alarmed when later that summer the local developer Raiffeisen presented his giant building that exceeded by far the River Vision square footage and totally, violated every concept of public access that document called for. Today, I just wanted to talk about a couple other things on the riverfront. Some things about the RDG plan, but I guess the question I'd like to have raised is, I don't know if they raised it, perhaps not, but what can Davenport's riverfront look like that no other riverfront on the Mississippi River can be? And I think if we ask ourselves that question, we'll end up with something that's going to be much more imageable and people be more comfortable with. One, I think, would be the connection to the adjoining downtown area that we have of Rock Island and its riverfront park, because we can essentially double our riverfront park by providing access by way of a ferry or a channel cat to Rock Island, and likewise their folks can come over here. Number two, I guess, would be the historical steamboat landing with an enhanced river view, a get your feet in the water river access that right now we only have at the foot of Main Street, where just a small portion of our riverboat landing that stretched from Main Street to Perry Street still exists. Although, if you've seen the photos for the construction of the parking lot that was put in the 50s, all those bricks apparently are buried under sand and are ready to be exposed if we ever have the vision or will to do so. And then the other goal, I think, would be a structure that at the end of the Sky Bridge that I guess, fulfills its promise and is in no way detracts or from what I think is our iconic Davenport element, which is the Sky Bridge. And in many ways, it's much like the St. Louis Arch. And if you think about adding on to the St. Louis Arch, I think it would have to be done with a lot of care and artistic vision and thought. And I think that needs to be done. And I think if we add on to the Sky Bridge, it needs to be a building that perhaps is an extension of the Figge, an annex to the Figge, an annex to the Adler, an annex to our River Center Convention Center, to bring all those things to the river, because by their name or by their design, they were always intended to be there. It's just they couldn't be put there. And then lastly, I think would be a building at the end of the Sky Bridge allows year-round access to the river, no matter if you're handicapped, no matter if you're whether it's freezing or if it's raining. You have access to something at the end of the Sky Bridge that's substantial size and a public space. So I think that's one thing that needs to be considered on that. I'll just go back to the 2014 plan. You've probably all seen this is the view from Sky Bridge Plaza showing the pier that they had shown, which was a visual extension of the Sky Bridge itself. And I thought, of all the things I saw in that report, that was the most striking and the most imageable. But regrettably, it's the one that's never survived, because we don't have that visual extension of the Sky Bridge on the RGG plan. In fact, all we have is a potential, perhaps in the future, for some type of a boat landing. I think that's totally unacceptable and needs to be reconsidered by RDG and by the Riverfront Improvement Commission. The other thing, if you'll see on this on the corner, you'll see a little piece of the limestone wall right at the foot of Main Street, and the cast iron guardrail that was put in 1914 by Bill Peterson and his commission at that time. That wall, again, has been totally obliterated by the RDG plan. As a matter of fact, there's about 800 feet of historic limestone wall that's perfectly acceptable, works well, has for 100 years, and I think it should be considered historic, that I don't think should be touched unless there's an overwhelming, compelling reason to do so. The places where the RDG plan does that is at the foot of Harrison Street, about 80 feet, at the end of Main Street, nearly 250 feet, and between Pershing and Perry Street, the side of Perry Street, about 450 feet. That's totally unnecessary. Unnecessary because you can certainly provide views of the river. You can actually cut back the river's edge. Let's say we just reestablished the historic landing between Brady Street and Main Street. Here's what you have to do. You tear down that concrete seawall that was put in the 50s so thoughtlessly by the Chamber of Commerce urging, tear that down, excavate all the sand, expose the brick that's underneath it. You've got the kind of view and access that this thing has, but rather than tearing down and rebuilding, it's there. I mean, it's one of those things that's so simple, I just can't believe that no one has advocated that. Instead, what we get is Heisenberg uncertainty principle to essentially, with post hoc reasoning, explain why all these curves exist right here, because of all the eddies and swirls. I looked at the river, I see it flowing in the straight line. If you're expecting it to be swirling around, you're talking about a little bayou in Louisiana, perhaps, or a small stream. This is the Mississippi River, and it flows in one way, and that's what was shown in Hargrave's plan. You see all these horizontal lines that are flowing with the river. That's just been totally lost in this plan. I think it ought to be reconsidered and perhaps something else be done.
Okay.
Building at the end of the Sky Bridge here.
Thank you, Bill. You want to wrap up?
I will wrap up. The building right here does not do no harm to the Sky Bridge, because when you're at the Juliet balcony, the top end of that deck cuts off the view of the river. That shouldn't be done. And besides, the building is too small to do anything. If there's no plan that I can see. They're saying hire an architect, but there should be a plan at this early stage, even, of how that building will work. So,
Thank you.
and I see.
Thank
Oh,
you.
and anyway, I see very little to commend the RDG plan, and I think that the more people look into it, they'll feel likewise. Thanks so much.
We have a motion to adjourn? Second? Second. Any debate? All those in favor say aye. Motion